Okay guys, so in this video we're going to walk through, well, basically how I've implemented posting messages to, well, the general channel, since we don't really have any, we have one channel and that's about it. We'll fix that in the future, but for now that's how it is. So let's have a look. And if I go to my little chat window here and I start typing something, we can see that, hey, messages are actually being produced. I can do pretty much anything here. Can do multi-line and all that good stuff. So it keeps on appending, and if I refresh my application window, I'll see that, hey, my messages are still actually there. And on the flip side of things, if I start a new session, like I log in as somebody else, and I can actually see that, hey, somebody has been typing here, and I can start typing here, and if I then go over to my other window, I see that, hey, that other user is actually typing as well. So, well, that's basically all the functionality there is. So we can trade messages and we can post to the same channel now. Let's have a look at how that actually works. So first and foremost, let's just walk it through from the top. So I've changed a little bit on our implementation for actually creating a message, as you see here. So create message is no longer create message, it's create message view. And why that is will become clear a little bit later, but that's basically how it works. And then I've changed our socket dispatch for our own messages to be an emit, basically, where my message. And that we'll touch on that in just a moment, why we actually do that. And then we've added this little endpoint here. We'll take our updates later. And that this endpoint is just to basically get the initial messages. So when I actually refresh the page, as you saw earlier, I'm actually going to the server and grabbing all these messages, because I want to make a distinction between what's real time and what can actually just be sent over basically HTTP. And that's about it, really. Cool. So we've had this small update here. We see that I've added the user service to the message service, and that's the pattern that is very common in object-oriented programming, where you have a service of some sort and it depends on other services to do the thing that is specific to that service. And then there's a bunch of stuff that changed here. As you can see here, we have create message view and get message view, which are basically the two main changes that has happened in our application. If we actually go in here, we can actually go a little bit closer here. So create message view is very similar to create message. It's actually referencing create message as previously. So it's just going to create a message, and then it's going to get the user with the corresponding user ID, and then it's going to create a message view. Now, what is a message view? Well, a message view is this. This is all it is. So what we're basically going to do is that we're going to copy the document model. This is in Mongoose, basically the property that is going to hold the attribute or the properties for the message itself, and we're going to overwrite or have the copy over so that there's a user view on our view, and then we're going to delete the user ID, and then we're going to create, like, just return the view. And the reason why we want to do it this way is because within MongoDB there isn't really a notion of a join. Now, if we had a relational database, we would have done a join here. So we would have traded or told the database to, hey, I have this user ID. Can you just attach on the user data on instead of using the user ID? So we're doing this a little bit manually. And the reason we have this concept of a view is because we never ever, if we can avoid it, want to send like just the raw data that is in the database. You always want to have at least a little bit of cleaning of some sort, and that will be hopefully clear when I show you the user view here, as we've touched on before. I mean, a user in our system has a password as well, but it's a lot safer if you have this idea of a view that you send to the client. So you just, because it's such a risky thing, guys. If you have like sensitive information on your models and you send the model as is to the client, odds are that you're simply going to end up sending something that shouldn't be there. So you have to be, like, I'm not saying don't go crazy with it, but be aware of it. And then we have guest message views, which is very similar to create message view, which all it's going to do is that it's going to do the same thing, but over an array, or other, like it's going to grab all of the messages in the channel and just basically create message views from all of them. That's all that's happening here. And I've also made we've added the concept. Well, actually, let's look at that a little bit later. We don't have to look at that specific file right now. So we can see here that on our client side of things, there's quite a few things that have been updated. So let's just walk through it. We have a bunch of stuff that's going on here. And there's tons and tons of functions that have changed here. So basically, as we can see here before, originally we were just grabbing the user, but now we're actually getting the channels as well as the user. And then basically all we're going to do here is that we're going to filter through on startup. We can actually go right into this file and kind of walk through it. So what's going to happen is that we're going to grab the incoming channels now as well, because these were hard-coded array values earlier. And then we're just going to grab all of them. As we do with the user, we wrap our incoming channels in a channels class, which is the thing that, well, we can actually look at the channels immediately. So the channels is just this little wrapper function that is going to extract out the properties that I need on the client and create my client-side view off of all of this. And then it's just going to return all those channels. And then I'm going to filter through all of the channels, and I'm going to find the channel that has a name that is equal to the last visited channel for the specific user. And yeah, that's about it. And then I'm going to grab all the messages for this channel, and we're going to set the user, we're going to set the channels, and then we're going to set, well, all the messages. And we do the same thing here. We have a messages, like a view for messages, or message. Let's see if I can find it here in the outline. Here it is. So basically that's all this. I just changed post to message because I started thinking that, hey, that's not a good idea to mix the concept of a post and a message. So I just kind of changed the name there to message so we can be a little bit more consistent. And what else changed? Let's have a look at more of this diff. We had, yeah, exactly. We had this concept of a message, and or rather a my message, and actually having a regular message. So we have two concepts now. We have a message, which is the message that you're writing, and an incoming message, which is the thing that somebody else is writing to you. Now, the reason we want to make that distinction is because if I scroll up here, and I type something and I hit enter, I want to be directed down to the bottom of the screen. Like, we want to scroll all the way down and see our latest message. Or rather, that's the behavior that we're going for here. But however, if I am on, let's say, this other account here, and I scroll to the top like this, and I write something here, I don't want this person, like the message is down here. So it's already sent, but I don't want this person to just, be forced to the bottom of the screen every time I send like somebody else is sending an incoming message. So that's why I solved it by simply having this concept of distinguishing between what another person has written and what I have written, even though it's coming over the same socket. Cool, and that's about what's changed there. So let's have a look at the chat component, where quite a few things have changed as well. I've made a few name changes here, so you can see in the diff. And we've also made one major change that you may have noticed earlier, that instead of having this random, because earlier we had this randomized string that was just representing the user that is going to be typing, but now we're actually grabbing the user from the application state and simply sending, using that value instead as to represent the user. And what else? Like, sending the message has been updated as well now. So basically, instead of just grabbing, hey, some random ID, we actually have the concept of, there is a state that we call AppState, and there is a user on that state, and there is an ID, and that's about really it. So we're grabbing the user on the AppState. And then we have the channel ID, which is, it's still the same thing basically. We just wrapped this, as you saw earlier, that we simply, now instead of underscore ID, I felt that, hey, we're going to be consistent. And as we saw here, all I'm going to do is that, hey, I'm going to map the underscore ID to an ID. And that's about it, really. So what else do we have here? So there's tons of stuff that has changed. I mean, this was a pretty big story in of itself, but well, let's just walk through it. So open more actions. No, actually this one, render message. So render message is a bit of a change, as you can see here. So earlier we had this concept of render post, but now we have render message. And render message is basically, because what we needed to do here is that we needed, or rather what I wanted to do here was that I needed to create this concept of a chat list item. And if we have a look at the chat list item, this is basically just the same code we had earlier in render post. If we're really like we have a look here, this is like basically the exact same code as you saw earlier. It's just that we moved it into a separate component. Now, why do we want to do that? Well, the reason why I want to move it into a separate component is because, remember, when the component first renders, this is what's going to be created. But subsequent renders, in other words, when every time you write a message or you send a message or you receive a message or something like that, you're going to have to start appending new elements to this this node, basically. And that's why we want to like remove this concept of like just a function that renders a string and actually have a proper component, because remember that the chat list item that we have here, this component is it's extending our component interface, which allows us to do this thing here. So let's actually have a look, like a closer look at this. So on event now has changed, and you see here that we have this if statement where we're either going to look for add message or add incoming message, and then we're going to grab the messages, like basically the state where we have all of the messages that are in the chat, and then we're going to grab the last message, and we're going to just instantiate this in the same way as you see that we're setting our children over here. And all we're then going to do is that we're going to append to our messages, like the element that we have a reference to, which is down here. So we're simply going to append a new child to this element, and that's why we wanted to have it in a separate, like a real component instead. So we can call create element on this message element, and it's going to do the same thing it does for all of our other components. It's just going to create a node with the expected like behavior and all the associated information with it, which is pretty nice. And then we can simply keep on appending. So that's what we're doing for now. We will have to think later about maintaining references and stuff like that, but for now this is going to work absolutely flawlessly. So what else is there? Yeah, as I stated before, like we've made a few name changes and stuff like that, and we created this reference here, so we had somewhere to actually append all of our new nodes. Let's have a look. Well, there's a few. We can just. I changed, as you may notice, the profile image isn't my face anymore. It's actually just the color blue, because hey, maybe not everybody wants my face as their avatar. And then we have changed added a bunch of actions. Fairly boilerplate code here, nothing super interesting, where we just dispatch these new chat actions as you saw earlier, like adding a post, or sorry, adding a message, adding an incoming message, set the messages, and get messages, and so forth and so forth. And our reducer has the same sort of update, where we simply update all of this code here, so that we can add a message, and all it's going to do is that, hey, it's going to grab the messages on the state, and it's going to concatenate the new value that is coming in, which is just this new message, and then it's going to overwrite the state. And then we have set messages just to set the initial ones, which is just direct overwrite of the messages key on our state. And as you can see, the init state here has just received this little array here with messages. So all of this we saw here on the side here, like this hard-coded stuff, is now gone, and instead we are left with, well, basically a lot less code, because the thing is that now we're, as you saw, like we moved all of this bootstrapping, like getting all of these channels and like grabbing the messages and all this stuff. It's now in the actual entry point of the application, so it can happen when everything fires off, or like when the user actually starts the application. So that's about that, and then I added this tiny little piece here where you may notice that I just wanted to now that we have multiple users, I added like just a username to the header. Nothing major. That was actually more for me than for the application itself. So I could see which user I was on when I was testing all of this. But we can keep it around. And a small CSS update for that. So the channels list, I fixed a small bug that I had as well, where the selected state, if like when we do the initial render and I click and I refresh, now we actually have both of the required classes on this element correctly, because I was missing this the sidebar underscore li class when we initially render that component. So that was a small fix, Boy Scout rule and all of that good stuff. And yeah, and I did a few updates here as well, where basically now, instead of, as you can see here, like we don't need to have this in an asynchronous block anymore, because we're not going to grab the channels inside of the channels list anymore. This has changed now. So as you saw earlier, in the main in the enter point of the application, we're actually bootstrap. That's where we are grabbing the channels, and we're simply dispatching the set channels from that point instead. So now we've changed this to instead simply grab the channels on the store or on the state, like directly instead. And that's basically all that's changed. So we just moved code from one place to another. And yeah, and a little bit of a rename here on the selected channel, because hey, we changed _ID to just be ID for convenience purposes. And then finally, here is our get messages function that is simply going to grab the messages, and that's about it really. So more or less, I would say that we're pretty done with this task now. We can move this over to ready for testing. So next is going to be to list users that are part of the channel. So let's have a look at that.